What is up, Fantasyland? Welcome to the GOAT District live via the Player Profiler Network. We are entering week 8 of the NFL season, and one thing is for sure, there are some golden oldies putting up some league-winning production. Tonight, we look at seasoned vets who are putting smiles on fantasy owners who were bold enough to draft them over the new shiny toys. Were you one of those owners? We have a lot to get to, so go grab yourself a cold one, smash the like button, and let's get.
GOAT District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
What is up, Fantasyland? Welcome back to the GOAT District, and we are happy to be back on the Player Profiler Network on a Tuesday night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. You can find us here on the weekly. Dan, I can't believe it is already week 8. Walking into week 8, I mean, we've got 7 weeks behind us now. You start seeing separation, not only in the NFL, you know, teams like Baltimore starting to find form, maybe some fakers coming out, to reality now. And you see that in your own fantasy leagues. You know, the top teams, or the cream is, rising to the top. And then those, bottom teams are kind of, putting up the L's. So you're starting to see the shape of the leagues, but there's still a lot of fantasy. There's still a lot of football to go, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. And, just like the Vikings, you don't want to try to count yourself out too early. But on the other hand, you need to be aware of the hand that you've been played. Some of that might be due to yourself. Some of that might be due to injuries or other circumstance. But, you got to kind of figure out where you're at, where you're going, especially in Dynasty, and start making moves to go in the right direction.
For sure. And tonight we're going to dive into, I mean, you see it in the thumbnail. You've got the topic du jour, Dan, is the golden oldies. You see it right now, whether you look at the rankings or, stat leaders, there are some of these old vets, Dan, that, coming into the season, you and I both know they're not as fun. They're not as shiny. They're not as new as, let's say, the rookies or those second-year breakout, those sexy first and second year upside picks, right, Dan, as opposed to the tried and true.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of a funny thing. We try to discourage the older receivers, the older running backs, the older everybody, I think a little bit too quick. And, what we forget is these guys are outliers. If their career has lasted this long, they're not just like some, normal run-of-the-mill wide receiver or running back or anything like that.
We're ageist, Dan. We're ageist, and I know it's easier to become ageist in some positions versus others. Right now, you look at, the rankings for receivers so far, and, sprinkled in there, you've got a lot of these guys. I mean, they were going high enough, first 3 rounds, Dan, but at least you're getting your money's worth. You know what I mean? Whereas people maybe who drafted Bijan in the first round, maybe not the happiest after this past weekend. There's some injuries that have occurred. Whereas the tried and true, Dan, again, it's not as sexy when you draft your team and you're looking at it and everyone in the league, you know, especially we do those leagues, Dan, where we've got like a bunch of our friends that we like to compete with. And you're looking at the rosters after, we're looking at the draft boards. They don't look as sexy. But right now, those are the teams that are putting up the numbers. I mean, if you look at overall, Dan, you know, you and I did a lot of drafts coming into the season. We did a lot, you know, on this very channel. We did a lot more on the GOAT District channel, which you should go subscribe to right now so you don't miss a thing. And brain fart, Dan. Save me. Brain fart.
I will save you. So here's one way to look at it, and that is the best prediction of players who are going to perform well, especially at wide receiver, is those who have performed well in the past. If you follow Jacob Rickroad on the X or Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days, you know, he has a chart that he will put out anytime you want. You know, if you look back through his feed, you'll probably find it, and it just shows, you know, like the PPR finishes for all the top 24 wide receivers, and it goes back. He goes back into history, like into the early 2000s, maybe even slightly before that, and it's amazing. Once players jump up into the top 24, especially if they stay there a second year, the odds are going to appear time and time again are very, very high. So, you know, you don't want to go counter to that. You want to be leaning into that instead of leaning away from that. You know, like I say, I think, you know, these players who are performing well at 28, 27 years old, you know, and you're going, yeah, well, they've passed their age peak now. I don't want to draft them at 29. You know, they're already outliers by performing as well as they are at 27, 28 years old. You know, when you look at these age curves and all that kind of stuff, it's taking into account, most of them are taking into account all wide receivers. You know, the ones who are up for a cup of coffee versus, you know, the ones who hang around for a decade or more. And so, you know, the older guys are not necessarily the guys you want to be discarding right away. But as always, situation is going to matter as much or more than anything.
Yeah, for sure. So if we're looking at, Dan, you know, you're looking at rankings right now, wide receivers, you're looking, you know, coming into the season where we were at, how are receivers doing compared to other positions? Because running back, it's easy to be an ageist, you know. Coming into the season, just to kind of tail off on what you were talking about, you don't want to box yourself out of anything, right? When you're coming in and say, I'm not drafting receivers over this age, or I'm not drafting, because at the end of the day, Dan, as much as we sit here and we analyze coming into the season, we try to figure out, you know, the best builds, the best, you know, how to approach tiers and rankings. It comes to one simple fact, Dan. You got to draft the right player. Maybe you drafted some older players, but maybe you didn't draft the ones that are crushing right now, right? So at the end of the day, you got to draft the right players. So when you're looking at other positions compared to the receiver position, do you have a position where you see age being more of a factor? You know, like we're seeing right now with these older receivers, because like you said, and we talk about it often when we do our Dynasty shows, if a receiver's been in the top 12 already, finished top 12 as a receiver for a season, there's a very, very high chance, and a way higher chance than any other option there that you're drafting, to finish again as a top 12 receiver, or wide receiver one. And I mean, doesn't that make it simple? You know, and are we not maybe complicating it, Dan, by trying to find the next hot thing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, of course, part of it is if you can find that next young hot thing, especially in Dynasty, that's worth an awful lot. In redraft, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, they're all going back into the pool at the end of the year. So, you know, who cares how old Tyreek Hill is? All we care about is, you know, how can he do this year? But, you know, if you take a look at, you know, just looking at the player profile or Dynasty rankings, the top 10 wide receivers, you've got, you know, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, all ranked ahead of Tyreek Hill. You know, you know, and I'm not here to quibble with the rankings. I'm just saying that that's something that you can exploit if you're willing to do it. You know, you're giving up, you know, that youth Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, those are guys that are between 23 and 24 years old right now. The Waddle and Smith are about to turn 25. And Tyreek Hill is about basically 5 years older than Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith. But on the other hand, he's also the number one wide receiver in all of Dynasty, and it ain't close. And that's worth a lot when you can get those super premium performers. So that's what you want to be looking for is, look for those receivers who can be super premium performers. And if they've already done it, they've got a much, much higher chance of doing it rather than you trying to speculate and say, I'm going to draft Drake London and hope he can join those ranks. Or I'm going to draft Jackson Smith and Jigba and hope he can join those ranks. Because 80% of the time, those guys are going to fail to do as well, as a Tyreek Hill. 90% of the time, 95% of the time. I mean, put your own figure on it, but it's not happening often. Whereas Tyreek Hill is kind of the sure thing right now.
Yeah, and that comes down to your roster build too, right, Dan? Like even if it's redraft or it's dynasty, having an older stud receiver, you'll adjust your roster based on that. So you can always kind of make it work. And I'm sure right now you've got Tyreek Hill in that build. You're feeling really good about it on a weekly basis, especially these guys, Dan. Like we see Stephon Diggs tied to Allen maybe not having his best time right now, but still tied to Allen and, one of the better offenses in the league. You've got Tyreek tied to Tua, and we all know how the power that's coming out of Miami's offense and the production that's coming out of there. So especially these guys, Allen with Herbert, that are tied to a good offense, to a good receiver, and they've done it before. Not only once, some of these guys, Dan, have done it a few times, have been at the top, of the receiver rankings. So you hope that you mixed in some of these guys. I know Tyreek Hill is a guy I'm very happy to have a lot of right now. I know, you and I have teams together. We even did a show together about going out there and buying Tyreek Hill for a team that we turned around thanks to him and a couple other moves. Let's think, going into 2024, Dan, how has this, kind of keeping it macro before we get into some specific player situations, but how has this, or does this change how you draft going into next year? Seeing how these guys, I feel like every year this kind of happens where these vets, put up these nice production numbers.
Right. Yeah. And everything is kind of, it's a little bit specific to each particular player. Like you're paying a lot more for Tyreek Hill in a startup dynasty next year than you're going to pay for example, Keenan Allen. Or Amari Cooper, and there are reasons for that, obviously. 26.9 reasons per week or something like that for Tyreek Hill. But the thing is being able to recognize the value where you find it. Because I was looking through some of the startup dynasty values just from this past, the 23 season. And, you find, a player like Keenan Allen nestled in between Amari Cooper and DeAndre Hopkins, and to me, Keenan Allen is kind of that value that stands out. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, hindsight's 2020. He was hurt last year. How did you know he wasn't going to be hurt this year? You're getting the injury discount on him because Keenan Allen, without that hamstring injury last year, would have probably been a lot closer to, wide receiver, because he was going at, I lost him here. He was going at wide receiver 35 in Dynasty startups. And, he would have been probably going closer to wide receiver 15 or something like that if it was not for that injury. So, you kind of have to look and say which of these guys don't fit. I can look at DeAndre Hopkins and I can say, yeah, he was a wide receiver 40 because he's on an offense that just doesn't throw the ball that much. So that makes sense. I can look at Amari Cooper and I can say, hey, he potentially has quarterback problems with Deshaun Watson. I mean, Watson looked terrible last year. So, I can understand why he was there. And you just have to look and see with each player, is there a reason why they're down here? Or are they just down here because people are tired of them?
Yeah. Yeah, and that happens, right?
Yep.
Or they don't have the right jersey on, or
Yes, and exactly. And Anthony in the chat pointing out Allen was on a way better offense than Amari and Hopkins too. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's when you can get that older player that his quarterback already is relying on in a better offense. That's what you want to do. So you want to pick and choose your spots for the older players, but you don't want to just necessarily be pushing up youth no matter what. And one thing I kind of want to talk about here is like those wide receiver twos on their own teams, like Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle. Those are all or were all top 12 dynasty wide receivers over the past year. If you're doing a startup in 23, you were looking at them as basically a wide receiver one, because you were going to have to draft them in the top 12 wide receivers. And I think that what we're starting to learn is that might not be the best idea to be pushing wide receiver twos on their own team up into wide receiver one overall range, even though they are nice and young and productive, and they've shown us that they can play the game and play the game at a high level. But the problem is they're being blocked by another player, and how are you going to blame Jalen Hurts for throwing the ball to AJ Brown a whole lot more than Devonta Smith? It's working, right? They're paying AJ Brown a lot of money to go do that, so that's what they're going to do. Devonta Smith, hey, good player. If anything happens to AJ Brown, you got yourself a league winner maybe, but he's not going to be that guy week in, week out like what you paid for.
Yeah, it almost becomes like you're just trying to get a piece of that offense, or you want a piece of that quarterback, and you're trying to get the next best thing, but they're pushed up in value, overvalued, of course. It's almost like I think of when I used to do like hockey pools back in the day for the playoffs, when the playoffs would come, and you'd see guys on the third and fourth line on some teams getting drafted ahead of like top line guys on other teams, just because they didn't think they would go as far as whatever into the playoffs. But the guys who take those values on those top lines later are the guys who pay off, when those teams go far. So it's similar here, where if you're paying attention to who, we talk about then either narrow targets or just being one of the target hogs on the roster. And maybe we get our hopes up with the number two guys again, just wanting a piece of that offense. Especially with these guys that have shown us something, Dan, like, T. Higgins has had this huge games. Devonta Smith has had the huge games. So, we get a little like too excited, I think, and push their values up, especially when they're younger guys. They're shiny toys, Dan, and next to Keenan Allen on that in the player queue, it's just not as pretty.
Yep, exactly.
So let's look at a couple of these guys. We already talked about them, Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill. Both of them now over 29 or past the 29 mark. We see kind of, once you get into the 30, 31, then there's kind of that cliff drop. Everyone's different, but it seems pretty consistently around that range. We've seen some of the best, drop off after the three starts popping up on their age. Tyreek has a few more 20-plus yard plays, obviously. I think he's got like almost double of what Diggs has. But you're loving either one of these guys right now. Which guy would you prefer moving forward? And what do you think? I know, like, if you are a contender, you're probably, not moving these guys. But let's say you thought your team was a contender. You started off okay, and now you've suffered a few more losses, Dan. You're not contending this year. What do you want for one of these guys if you're selling them in Dynasty?
Yeah, for Tyreek Hill, you still need a lot, an awful lot, or Stephon Diggs, because, the thing is, Tyreek Hill said, I want to play for 2 more years after this. What's your standard window in Dynasty? It's 3 years or less. I mean, if you're playing with a 3-year window, you're playing, I think, very long range, the way the Dynasty game is played today. And especially, when you start thinking about, he's only going to last 2 more years or something like that, go back and look at the Dynasty rankings from, 2 years ago and laugh, because, we get so much comically wrong. But the things that tend to be right, again, tend to be those players who have been there before, who have done it before. So like if you have a Tyreek Hill and you're doing a rebuild, I don't think you necessarily need to get rid of him. I mean, if you can move him for enough picks to make it worthwhile, sure. But, if your rebuild is taking longer than a year or two, you're probably not doing it right to start with, or you're in a very, very tough league, in which case, yeah, maybe you do sell him. But, Tyreek Hill, at his production, he's got to be worth at least 2 firsts right now. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I might even want like a decent upside type of Jameson Williams type add on to those two first, some kind of upside play as well back. But I think you're right. It's always nice when you don't have to get rid of a stud and you're doing like a reno mode then, because, we like to make them quick. But sometimes, let's say you take over an orphan, and they've got Hill and maybe a bunch of scrubs. That's the only piece really you can move. So that's kind of why the question. But I mean, you're right. You don't always have to move these high production guys, because the other thing is you want production going into the next season too, right? Especially if you want that team to compete, because you're still gonna have the whole offseason to reno mode or rebuild or whatever. So you don't necessarily need to think 2-3 years down the road. All right, let's one of your favorites, Dan, used to be in Minnesota, definitely one of the older guys in the leagues right now. Adam Thielen pulling a Steve Smith a la Cam Newton when they first connected in Carolina. Thielen right now 7th in receptions, 49 of 59 targets. Carolina, though, 23rd in scoring, 24th in passing yards per game, Dan, but number 1 in pass attempts in the league right now. What can we expect, or can we expect this to continue for Thielen, you think, the rest of the year? Or do you think someone like Mingo or one of these younger guys on the team come up and maybe start stealing a bit of that target or momentum as we get deeper into the season?
In a way, it kind of seems crazy to say, yeah, he can continue it, but in a way, it also isn't, because this is a guy who's done it. When he wasn't doing it, it was because either he was injured or, when the Vikings were force feeding the ball to Justin Jefferson, those were not great times for Adam Thielen either. But he comes to a new team. He's running out of the slot, which is where he's always done great work. And, he's kind of one of those really big slot guys. And that just fits with exactly what Bryce Young is looking for right now. A young quarterback, that slot guy, is a big safety blanket, So it's like he just carries that teddy bear around with him all the time. That's what Adam Thielen is to Bryce Young. And so I don't see that really changing. I mean, I think, as the year goes on, hopefully he can learn to target the downfield guys a little bit more. But he's always going to be coming back to Thielen, because Thielen has proven he can do it. He's got that great level of confidence. And when you're a rookie, you go back to those players that give you confidence when you're looking for targets. So I'm definitely in on Thielen.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst definitely not the lanky that we thought he might be.
No, exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, we saw Thielen take that role, so we got to adjust to it.
Yeah, agreed. All right, Dan, first the brain fart. Now I'm a little behind on the ad read, so we got to go to a word from our awesome sponsors here for the Player Profiler Network.
This episode is brought to you by Rival Fantasy. Rival Fantasy, the coolest fantasy platform not enough people know about, but they will once I'm done, baby, because they're always innovating. They just rolled out seasonal leagues. We set them up for patrons, for our listeners, and they funded over $1,000 in payouts. That's what Rival's all about. They're always innovating. They already had the fantasy book where you can take overs and unders, stack them up, multiply your payout, but then they added challenges so you can set your own lines and put them out there for the community, and then you can browse the community's lines and say, hey, this guy's crazy, I'm going to take the other side. It's cool. And they have fantasy bingo. Rival Fantasy is reminding me how much fun I can have with fantasy football, and use that promo code PLAYER. The promo code is PLAYER. They give you a $100 instant deposit match plus $25 plus a free play. That promo code is PLAYER for up to $125 in deposit bonus and a free play. You can't beat it.
And we are back. We're talking seasoned vets just crushing leagues right now. And a couple of guys, Dan, Davante Adams and Keenan Allen. Another couple golden oldies, as we're calling them tonight. Both currently top 10 receivers after 7 weeks, Dan. Which one do you prefer? Rest of the season, Keenan Allen or Davante? I think I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one. I know you were the big Keenan Allen guy coming into the season. And again, just an idea. If we're talking Dynasty, let's go the other way. How much would you pay for one of these guys, maybe if you're contender right now?
Yeah, so definitely Keenan Allen is the one I prefer. Not that I think he's any more talented or anything like that than Davante Adams. I think Davante Adams is a more talented player, but again, we're talking about we have to take into account the offense and the quarterback and everything else. And that to me makes Keenan Allen the much better play. Davante Adams, I think is going to perform better than he has the past couple weeks. I don't think that's anything age related or anything else. It's just, function of the offense has just been broken at the quarterback. And for Keenan Allen, I mean, I paid basically like a low first for him before the season started. And I think you can probably still get him for somewhere probably in the mid-first range, something like that. I mean, I think anybody who's rebuilding, if they've got Keenan Allen and you offer him a first, there's a pretty good chance that they're going to take that.
Yeah, I think that's probably where he's at, like a mid to low first for Thielen if you're buying that way. Question from the chat. Cohen is asking, his tight end is Logan Thomas. Should he spend a good amount on fab on Dalton Kincaid? We saw Knox go down with an injury. So for those of us that do have a bit of Kincaid, he started a little slow, Dan, but had a decent week this week. How do you see that moving forward? And I know Logan Thomas has been decent because I picked him up in a couple FFPC leagues, tight end premium, where I got a little light at the tight end position, and he's been decent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think I would discard Logan Thomas because I think he's depending on your league size, sometimes you can't afford to keep a backup tight end, and I get that, but here's the thing: Dalton Kincaid we've got Dawson Knox who has a wrist problem going on IR. So now Dalton Kincaid is basically the answer at tight end for Buffalo. The question is whether he can overtake Gabe Davis. This past week, he definitely did. I don't know if that was a one-off or whether that's going to continue. So I think there's more risk with, to the downside with Dalton Kincaid, but also a lot more risk to the upside. So that's why I would say if you can hang on to Logan Thomas, that's a great guy to have in your back pocket. And then, I would spend a pretty good amount of fab to pick up Kincaid. And it's hard to say how much fab you should spend. That's going to depend on your league rules, all that kind of stuff, how they treat the tight end. But definitely worthwhile.
He's got 50 of 200 remaining fab, he says.
Yeah, and and how bad do you need him? Are you a contender? There's so many different factors in there.
Exactly.
But basically the way I look at it is you just don't want to, if you really need a player, then you want to spend what it takes to go out and get him, and you don't worry if you overspent a little bit. If you don't really need a player, then you got to play it a little bit more, close to the vest and put in a bid that, if you lose him, you're okay losing him. But if you get him, you don't feel like, oh man, I spent too much or whatever. Especially
if this is like FFPC or tight end preems, you can get one of these, Kincaid could easily be a top, a tight end one the rest of the way.
Right.
Especially if Knox is injured and that drags a bit. All right. Keep the questions coming, guys, in the chat. Let's go to LA, Dan. Cooper Kupp, another vet. He's had a couple injuries now. He's coming back from his latest injury. He gave us a wide receiver 12 and a wide receiver 4 his first couple weeks when he came back. Puka Nacua, currently the wide receiver 1, Dan. Who would have thunk, right? Still getting monster production even with Cooper Kupp back. And then this past week, Cooper Kupp just went 2 receptions, 7 targets, for 29 yards versus Pittsburgh, while Puka had 10 for 119. How worried are you about Cooper Kupp? Are you worried at all, Dan? Do you think this is just like it's these two guys and it might be game dependent or game flow dependent? Or has Puka Nacua just become the wide receiver 1 with the Rams and Stafford's new favorite target? What do you think?
So first, no, I'm not too worried about Kupp. Bad games can happen for any player. Secondly, in that particular game with the Steelers have shown this year to be absolutely terrible at defending outside wide receivers, whereas they've been pretty decent against the slot guys. I haven't looked to see exactly how much Kupp was playing in the slot versus how much he's playing outside, But I'm pretty sure Puka was pretty much outside the entire time, and so that's not really surprising to see Puka have a great game against a defense like that. I think Matt Stafford is continuing to sling it and sling it well. So I think this is more of a 1A and 1B type thing rather than a wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 2.
Guys, smash the like, show your support for the show. If you're watching this post live stream, you have questions, you have a comment on something we said, you don't like my hat, anything, man, just let us know. We're happy to get the feedback from you, the audience. That's what we're here for. We want to help you guys win in fantasy football. Dan and I do that in the high stakes streets. Dan, we're doing pretty good at Dynasty this year, man. It's just, I feel like every year we're just crushing those Dynasty teams. 5-1 now with, I think, all of them, no?
6-1 with
6-1,
6-1 with a couple. We have one that was 5-2. So
all right, we can't
we'll have to work on that. It's kind of like the slow kid. You gotta tutor him a little bit more.
Oh man, I'm trying to use the good old trade finder for the question from our friend over here for Puka. What do you think his cost is right now? I mean, I don't know that anyone's selling him, to be honest, in Dynasty, because I feel like if you're Reno mode, he's so young. He's the newest, hottest thing. But then again, if you're in rebuild, maybe he gets you a lot more back. And then if you're contending, for sure you want him, but how much is it going to cost him?
Yeah, I think, Puka has gone from somebody who, after the first week, you could probably buy him for first couple weeks, you could probably still buy him for a second. I think at this point, a first is not going to get it done. You're probably more in the range of a first plus another really solid player or something like that. I don't know if I'd go as far as 2 firsts. That's not a price I'm going to pay, but that might be the price that it would take to pry Puka off of anybody.
Yeah, I don't mind buying high, Dan, but I'm definitely not buying high after a high production game. Like, I'm waiting for the guy to have a dud. You know what I mean?
Right.
I like to find the opportunity when I'm, keep that in your little notebook that you want to go out and buy yourself a Puka, depending on the league. But for me, it's not always the price. And I talk about this often when we talk Dynasty. It's the opportunity to buy some of these guys, Dan. When that window opens, sometimes you don't really care what the price is because you don't usually get the opportunity to buy him. And I know I did that with Justin Jefferson recently. You don't buy him right now while he's on the shelf, you're probably not going to get Justin Jefferson. So it's kind of that. But again, with Puka, he is the hottest thing right now. So I don't know that I'm necessarily going to buy him. I feel like you can probably get maybe you go buy Kupp, after his dud.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be kind of the easier way to go. Where do you rank Puka, JD, as far as like as a dynasty asset? Is he top 5, top 10, top 20?
I laughed because I couldn't believe it when I looked at because I was trying to see, where the old guys were in the rankings, and I could not believe he was number 1. First of all, I was like, wow. But yeah, I mean, I was gonna ask you, like, where do you think this guy's going next year in drafts, right? Like, is he gonna? He's probably going end of the first round. I think, like, if it doesn't start off that way, he probably ends up there towards where we were finding like ASB. And, Diggs was kind of falling back in that range. I feel like that's where he's probably going to be, end of the first, beginning of the second. But if he keeps tearing like this, Dan, he could easily be, maybe the next one. Maybe he's Kupp, where we saw Kupp this year. Maybe we see Puka next offseason. Yeah,
I mean, he's averaging basically in a PPR, he's averaging about 21 points a game. And that's rare air, for that. That's basically easily
let me
within
ask
the top
you this,
12.
Dan. Let's play this game. Sorry to cut you off, but I get excited when we do OTC. So we haven't done it in a while. So let's look right now. Puka Nacua or Zay Flowers?
And we're talking Dynasty?
Dynasty.
Puka.
Puka Nacua or Tyreek Hill?
Tyreek.
Davante Smith?
Puka.
Metcalf,
Definitely Puka.
Waddle,
Definitely Puka.
Garrett Wilson.
Man, that's a tough one.
What about Olave?
Uh,
Post
I got
post speeding ticket.
I probably got to put Puka over him. And that's, some of those things are, like Olave. I'm looking at, like, who is his quarterback right now and who is it likely to be. It's like, talent wise, I want to put Olave over Puka because I think he's, in a vacuum, I think he's a better wide receiver. But again, I don't think you can put all this stuff necessarily in a vacuum, even in Dynasty, because the thing is, you've got, by the time Olave gets to a different quarterback, it could be years from now.
Does he need Stafford?
What's that?
Does he need Stafford? Like, do you think, because we know Stafford slings it and he's great for receivers. Let's say he's older, he does have a back end issue. Let's say he's for whatever reason not around.
Yeah, I guess part of my ranking of Puka is I think Stafford's going to be around for at least a couple more years.
That's
if
my
I
question.
if I didn't believe that, then that would definitely change things. I mean, I think Puka is definitely one of those wide receivers that has to have a quarterback who's not necessarily elite, but at least borderline elite as a as a thrower of the football. We know Matthew Stafford's probably never going to challenge, Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen, as far as like fantasy points. But as far as being a thrower of the football, I think he's right up there.
Yeah. So I mean, from what you were where you were putting him, you probably have him like top 8, top 5 to top 8. I probably have him like top 12, top 10. That's probably where I'm comfortable having him right now. And like I said, if he keeps crushing like this, it's gonna be hard not to. It's for me, it's the targets. Like, he just keeps getting the targets, and my worry was Kupp coming back. So it's nice to see him getting those targets. I just, you want to see those Kupp games as well to go with it. So you got to see a lot of Stafford slinging the ball, basically, for them to both be happy.
Right, and I think that's an important way to think about it. But we've, one thing that I think is also important is, you kind of look at where did Puka come from, right? But imagine if it had been, like Quentin Johnson. Imagine if he was the one putting up these Puka stats.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Puka. Where would we have Quentin Johnson ranked right now? I mean, he'd probably be like easily top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty. Guys,
yeah, that's a tough one because he was not very popular, coming in as a rookie.
Yeah, even though at that, I mean, looking at, May Dynasty ADP, Quentin Johnson was number 5 of all the rookies, and he was the number 3 Dynasty wide receiver of the rookies. So he was right behind JSN and Jordan Addison.
Okay.
So, if you imagine him or JSN or Zay Flowers putting up these kind of video game numbers.
I see what you're saying. Like, guys who would draft capital, just for sure.
I mean, people would be falling all over themselves, to get a piece of this guy. And, I think we just kind of, we're still kind of anchoring to that draft capital that he had, which was, he was a fourth round, NFL pick, and also more like about a 4th round in Dynasty rookie drafts as well. And so we're kind of anchoring back to that with Puka, and I think he's got enough of a sample size right now that I think it's time to lose that anchor and just let's rank him for what he's doing.
It's funny you say that, Dan. I was thinking about that today. How there's some guys that it takes longer. I'm talking like personally, and maybe it's draft capital, maybe it's the jersey they're wearing, but Puka's a guy that I think I got him in one league, like when the waiver wire frenzy went, but he's just not a guy I was like really trusting that this was a thing, and by the time it's too late. And then by then, because you do have that opportunity, Dan, when those first 2-3 games, because people aren't sure yet, and like you said, people are still thinking, oh, he's got low draft capital, Cooper Kupp was coming back. So if you didn't buy him in the first like few weeks, it's like it's hard it's hard to commit to those guys without the draft capital. You know, I don't know if like how much people we had John Lobb on and Matt Hicks, and I think it was Matt or John or maybe both. I know they actually liked Puka coming in as a rookie, so maybe guys like that did have him on the radar. But yeah, I feel like sometimes it's too late by the time you give in to a guy and thinking he is going to be as good as he's shown, but by the time you actually get there, the opportunities are not as available.
Right.
All right, let's look at tight end a bit, because one guy who's definitely up there, age 34, crushing it right now. He's on top of the world. You know, he's got one of the biggest artists or pop or whatever you want to call her, famous people showing up at his games. His brother's rocking it with that documentary. I mean, the Kelceys are everywhere. They've got their podcast, which good for them. Great for Travis. I mean, I'm a big fan. It's fun to watch him play. But let's face it, Dan, he's 34 years old. And as much as we talk about the tight end position is like wine, where the older they get, the better they get. They're able to play at an older age, but they also take a beating, let's face it, at that position. So this I was going to say this weekend. It was actually on Monday. We saw TJ Hawk have a really nice game, and he's been legit this year, Dan. I know he's a guy that we like coming into the season. He just popped right away when he got to Minnesota. You could tell that that's something they were lacking. Rest in peace, Irv Smith Jr. But are we witnessing, Dan, the passing of the torch here with TJ Hawk? Is Kelce still your tight end one? I know coming into the season, especially the redraft tournaments, we were smashing Kelce anytime you can in that first round, tight end premium. And where does Mark Andrews, our boy Mandrews, fit into this equation with these guys?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of an interesting conversation because, Kelce right now, he is 34, age concerns, all that kind of stuff. But when you have Patrick Mahomes and you're his number one target and you have the level of chemistry those guys have is just insane. It's bananas. And you constantly see them both adjusting to the other. Like you go back and you look at the replay, Kelce's always managing to find that soft spot to settle in and make the catch. Mahomes is always, figuring out how he can get the ball to Kelce. When you've got that kind of thing going on a top offense that's as creative as what their offense is, and they scheme things to get Kelce the ball with room to run. And, that is extremely, extremely rare. And you contrast that to TJ Hawkinson, who's a guy who really works underneath a lot. He doesn't really do a lot of seam routes and things like that where he's really running down the middle of the field. He's more doing, almost doing more like a slot receiver. So, as Scott Pianowski, he's been on the show a couple times, good friend of mine, says, TJ Hawkinson might need 20 targets to get to 100 yards. In a PPR or a tight end premium league where you're getting extra points for those targets or for those receptions, that definitely helps out. Like this, the game last night, he had 11 catches for 88 yards or something like that. And I think he had 14 targets or something. So he had 14 targets, still couldn't get to 100 yards. So that puts him at a, kind of at a different tier than Kelce, but still a very, very valuable tier. I mean, we know the tight end position is just, it's crap. Anybody you can hang your hat on reliably week to week, is worth their weight in gold. I think Mark Andrews is probably the closest to being a Travis Kelce. The problem is that offense is not remote, Lamar Jackson is not Patrick Mahomes. He's an awesome quarterback in and of his own right, but he goes about the job differently. He doesn't throw as much. He's not looking for Mark Andrews. Like Mark Andrews is not the force that Kelce is. But if you put Andrews on the Chiefs and you put Kelce on the Ravens, you might see Mark Andrews looking a lot like Travis Kelce and Travis Kelce looking a lot like Mark Andrews, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's right. And now, especially with the Ravens getting new weapons with Zay and, I always just want to say OBD for some reason. Odell Beckham. Is it Old Dirty Bastard?
That's a different group.
That's Old Dirty Bastard. That's a pop reference of the night than Taylor Swift. But No, I see what you're saying, and I mean, PPR manager's beauty, right? Like he's getting you touchdowns, he's getting receptions. If you're betting props, he's definitely the over on the reception numbers, not the yardages. Is what you're saying, Dave.
Yeah. So you've got Hawkinson for receptions, and then Andrews for yardage for sure.
I love it. All right, Derrick Henry, Dan. New hot topic out there in the X machine, and your brain starts imagining, and it is fantasy, and that would definitely be a fantasy. I looked at some of the teams that were favorites. I think the Bills were like 2-1 favorites to get him, or something ridiculous like that. I mean, I feel like anywhere he goes, especially the contenders, the good offenses, it's exciting. Where would be the most exciting for you? Where do you think the best fantasy landing spot is for Derrick Henry right now? And what do you think the chances are of him actually being moved for the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, I never, as you know, JD, I pretty much never bet on players ever moving. Yeah. It's just too,
you're seeing it more and more, though. Like it's happening more and more, especially when there's smoke. Like
it is happening more and more, but we're still talking about, like a good trade deadline. There's like maybe a dozen deals, and maybe 2, 3, 4 of them might involve a fantasy player, and maybe one of those might be a decent fantasy player. You know what I mean? It's just it's a tough deal. If he gets moved, I mean, I think Buffalo is definitely. Everybody would salivate about that. I'd love to see him in Cincinnati and just push Joe Mixon to the side or something like that. Baltimore, oh my God, that would be something else as well.
Did you see the list? Did you see the list? The odds?
No, I didn't.
So 2-1 the Bills,
okay.
3-1 the Chiefs, 4-1 the Dolphins, 6-1 the Cowboys, 8-1 the Steelers. I don't know why the Steelers would go after Henry right now. Like they're not...
well, I don't know. I mean, they do like a bell cow, and I don't know. He would certainly be better than Najee Harris.
I mean,
I'm not sure that Miami. I don't know that he's a great fit for Miami.
No.
I don't know that the Chiefs. Yeah, but in a way, I would be kind of disappointed because Mahomes just does not throw to the running backs that often. And
I don't know.
I'm afraid it would cheapen up Mahomes and Henry both. Would be the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, look, you could. Yeah, I think that it probably does. I'd way rather he goes to the Bills for sure. The Cowboys would just kill Pollard. The thing with the Dolphins is A-Chain's there kind of long term. So yeah, he comes in for this year. But and a team like the Chiefs don't necessarily I feel like Pacheco does what they need. He does what they need from the running back. And then they got like 6 other guys that are waiting on the sideline to McKinnon or, one of those guys, CH, to jump in whenever they need to fill in the gaps. So I don't know. Ravens for me is definitely interesting. I mean, that would, wow. They already look strong. So imagine them getting like J.K. Dobbins, but on juice.
Well, you just know that somehow Howie Roseman is going to end up getting him in Philadelphia for like a 6th round pick and a backup safety and a bag of peanuts or something. I mean, just the way that guy does deals.
And then you're always sitting there going, "Why did my team make that move?"
Yep, exactly.
We could have afforded that. Let's go back to oh, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I do think probably out of all those, Baltimore and Buffalo are my favorites. Those would be the preferred landing spots for me. I could also see him in the Chargers. I'm not sure it would necessarily. I don't know how well it would work out for fantasy, but it would be awfully fun in reality.
Yeah, he'd be like an overpaid Leonard Fournette there. I feel like
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, interesting, right? And fun to start seeing these things, and we see the Colts maybe going after Judy, or there's a lot of fun whispers out there of trade possibilities that are on the horizon. And I mean, it's always fun for fantasy, right? When the NFL plays Dynasty like we do and makes some exciting trades, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But Kirk Cousins, Dan, is definitely an old classic. I tell you, that guy, he's really grown on me in the last couple of years. Like, just he went from like being vanilla to he's vanilla, but he's got he's got some shimmer. He's definitely a fun guy. I feel like he brings probably more to the dressing room than we can ever imagine. And I feel like he's gotten better. Like, he just keeps getting better. He's kind of like, I talked about tight ends being like wine, right? And aging. And he just seems to be getting better, even without JJ beating the 49ers. Now, where do you rank Kirk Cousins? Because let's face it, he doesn't get respect everywhere, right? Like, whether it's Viking fans or Washington fans or whatever, NFL fans, fantasy fans, he's not the shiny, pick when you draft him. I know I have quite a bit of him just because I felt like he was a nice value this offseason. Where do you draft Kirk right now? And do you think he's Super Bowl material? Like, do you think he can take your Vikings to a Super Bowl?
I don't, because I think Cousins is a little bit, well, there are a lot of reasons on that, but mostly what it comes down to is Kirk Cousins is a really good quarterback, but he is not a franchise-defining quarterback the way he needs to be for the salary that he's making. When you're making $40 million a year, you better be able to carry the franchise no matter what the defense is doing, no matter what kind of receivers you got around you, because the simple fact is they're not going to be able to afford to put that good of a team around. And the thing is, they've put a lot of their bullets into the offense. With Jefferson and Hawkinson and Addison, and this is all fantastic for Cousins as a fantasy player, but it's not so good in reality, because the problem is with all those resources tied up on the offense, there's not much there for defense, and when you've got to score 35 points every game to win, which has often been the case for Cousins, I mean, that's too big of an ask for any quarterback, and so that's a tough thing. And then when you're when everybody on the offense is, treating the ball like it's got grease all over it, that also is not great too. But as far as a fantasy asset, Cousins he's fantastic, because nobody wants to put him up in the top 7 or 8 quarterbacks dynasty wise, and yet every year he performs for sure as a top 12 and often as a top 8 quarterback. And, so, for a while, I remember, was it as recently as last year, maybe 2 years ago, people were saying Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins are kind of the same guy. And it's like, it's not even close. So, Cousins, just because of the fact that he's kind of vanilla and all of that, and, an aw shucks kind of quarterback, he doesn't have the cachet of some of the other guys. But, when you're putting up 22.8 fantasy points per game, and you look at Pat Mahomes, he's putting up 25.2. You're in the same ballpark as him. You're in the same ballpark as Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson. All those guys. Tua Tagovailoa. So Cousins, I think, is a great fantasy asset, and he comes cheaper than pretty much all those guys.
Yeah, and we've seen him be top 3. He gave us a wide receiver, QB2. He gave us 2 top 5s, including a top 2 finish. He's given us 4 top 10 finishes in his first 6 weeks. And your one concern would be, JJ gets hurt. Oh no, what happens to the offense? What happens to Cousins? Slide in Jordan Addison, and just take over what JJ was kind of leaving on the field there. And then TJ Hawk, of course, like we saw, and even Akers kind of looked like, if you squinted the right way, he kind of looked okay. I don't know, Dan, what do you think? I wasn't as big on Akers coming in, but I feel like his price is down now, and maybe we saw a little bit of them maybe wanting to use him more in Minnesota.
I mean, I think Minnesota really needs to explore that Akers opportunity a little bit more, because Madison ain't it.
Yeah.
Madison is what happens when you take analytics too far.
Called it, Dan. He called it. I just couldn't draft that guy this offseason, man. It's a tough thing, because they're sitting there, they let the analytics tell them that, oh, here's a guy who he gives you a high success rate and all that kind of stuff. What they're not taking into account is
you've got to have guys who have, some juice. And Madison, he just doesn't have juice. And also he had Dalvin Cook, taking some of the punishment. And, Madison kind of comes in that breather role. And when you're carrying the ball 7-8 times a game instead of, 12 or 13 times a game, there's a big difference.
Yeah, the whole Cousins in primetime thing is kind of out the window now, right? He's got a couple TDs, one interception. He's part of it is okay. Your primetime games are usually games against better teams, so that's valid. That's very valid, actually. Yeah, it's a good point.
So it's part of that. There's a little bit of variance in there too. That sometimes it just so happens that you don't play well on games that happen to be nationally televised, and it's not necessarily because of that. It's either because the defense was good or it's just kind of random luck.
All right, Dan. Let's end on this. We got a little trade question in the chat here. Josh, would you trade Carr for Roshan Johnson and Jonnu, 20 men, redraft PPR, Russ to start? This has to be super flex, right?
If Carr is on your bench and you can trade him for Roshan and Jonnu, and that helps your team, yeah. All these things are so team specific. What does your team need? But if Carr is a tradable asset, yeah, Roshan and Jonnu, I would take that back because I think Roshan is going to be a valuable part of the Bears the rest of the way. And Jonnu, would you rather have him or Kyle Pitts? It's a valid
Jonnu's
question.
Jonnu's crushing. I picked him up in FFPC, and it's like I can't not start him. I feel stupid if I don't start him. Like, he's in the high teens every week, points wise. Now, I'm just curious: is that super flex, man? Josh, let me know, brother. Yeah, I know. I put these up, Dan, while you were yapping. Zach Moss.
Oh, good. I would love that.
Yeah, Pierre Mar. Yeah, he's put up some good ones. He had Davante going to Tampa, and then just commenting that Addison is definitely a league winner.
I don't know about that. If Justin Jefferson stays out, then yes. But otherwise, I think Jordan Addison kind of finds himself in the same shoes as Devonta Smith and
so you think he's
Jalen Waddle.
Sell high?
If you can get somebody who's going to give you those kind of prices, super high price, yeah, I think he's.
I feel like after a 2 TD game, Dan, like this with those kind of numbers, he's the new shiny kind of. I feel like
let's put it this way: if somebody came to you and said, "I'll trade you Puka Nacua for your Jordan Addison," are you taking that deal?
For sure, I am. We just talked about he's like a top 5 to 8 receiver. Even if I don't think he is, I'm taking that deal just to have the value of the Puka Nacua, who's going to be going in probably end of the first round in this offseason's drafts.
What about if it was Puka and a third for Jordan in a second?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not big on those trades just because I like. What do you? Yeah, right. I might do it. I feel like they're similar. They're similar enough just to get the trade up. I don't know, Dan. I feel like those trades are kind of. I don't like doing the same position trade. You know what I mean? The swap. Mm-hmm. I don't like those trades.
Yeah, you got to feel like you've got an edge on it somehow.
Exactly.
That the other guy isn't seeing, and and to me, it might be if the other guy is anchoring to that Jordan Addison draft capital too much. Yeah. Then that might be where the edge is.
I agree. If you can get on either one of those guys, if you can squeeze some nice value right now. Yeah, man, this has been fun. We talked some redrafts, some Dynasty. The chat was live. You guys were nice. We got guys coming in late. Guys, go rewatch the show. Make sure you smash the like. Make sure you follow the GOAT District channel. Dan and I are on there. We've got the Owners Lounge where we talk about our Dynasty teams. We get into details. We were trading for Tyreek Hill this offseason. Turned around some really nice teams, doing well in those leagues. We'll come back with an Owners Lounge soon. We've got Thursday tailgate where at 12 noon we do a deep dive into the Thursday night game, looking at all the start sits, prop bets, lines, anything related to that Thursday night game, you can find us at 12 noon Eastern on the Goat District channel. And then at 7 p.m., we do the Wednesday tailgate. I know we got Mike Shopes coming on from Deep End.
Deep End, yeah, coming on next week.
And the Buffalo Bills radio voice, Mr. Mike Shopes. So he'll be on next Thursday. And then we're working with Mr. Jax Falcone's agents right now to schedule him in very shortly. And we're going to start loading up the guest list. Dan, I know we've got some people kind of in the green room that we're just waiting to get some dates for. So make sure you tune into all of it, including the podcasts on your favorite. I'm reading the chat as I'm reading. Sorry, Dan. Your taps.
Yeah. Now you know we're getting down to it. From December shandy to Oktoberfest, yes. Oktoberfest is multiple times better than any summer shandy.
There it is. All right, you heard it there from He's the Overripe Sleeper. No E on the end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight's show. You can find us every Tuesday night right here on the Player Profiler Network. I'm JD at JD Go District. Guys, go smash your week 8 and keep crushing. We're here to help you. We'll check you all later.
Go District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text. That trash offer's the best. You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the and I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.